Well, hello everybody, and welcome to another edition of Faster Masters Rowing Radio, where having a rowing coach only makes you better. Following a program gives you a true pathway to becoming a confident rower who's respected by your peers. You can become the athlete you want to row with. I'm Rebecca Caroe, and I'm joined as ever by Marlene Royle.
Hello, Rebecca, and hello to our Faster Masters audience.
It's great to be back. Now, before we kick off big time, it's coming up to planning time for the holidays. You know you need to find a unique gift. And don't we all know just how hard that is? Your gift has to be novel. It must be exciting. And ideally, it should get a real wow when it gets unwrapped. The challenge bar is set high. Faster Masters have found the answer. Unidragon make unique, colourful puzzles that not only challenge your assembly skills, but hidden within each puzzle are animal silhouettes disguised as puzzle pieces. It's a little hard to describe, so go to unidragon.com, that's UNIdragon.com, or search for Unidragon puzzle, and you'll see what I mean. There are designs that are shaped like owls, a wolf, a lynx, a row of birds, a tiger, and a stunning fantasy phoenix. The colours and the styling are amazing, and each one could almost become an artwork in its own right. But look again for those tiny little embedded animals. They make the Unidragon puzzle a gift to treasure long after Christmas is over. You can also snag yourself a 10% discount coupon using the code ROWING841 at unidragon.com. So, Marlene, we're back on the saddle again, and yet again, I have made a mistake about time zones. I apologise to everyone in US Eastern time zone. I did not realise that your clocks changed.
Well, we deal with several time zones because they change twice here and they change twice in New Zealand and not at the same time. So we certainly do our best, but not everything is predicted. Google Calendar doesn't update your meetings for different time zones. So
no, maybe that's absolutely right.
Yeah,
we need to get that sorted.
We definitely do.
Now, we have a new webinar to announce. A while ago on my Rowing Chat podcast, I interviewed a guy called John Wojcicki, and he is an expert in club management and spends a lot of time looking at how clubs can use digital tools, particularly for digital marketing. And he wrote an amazing LinkedIn piece, which is called Rowing, the last billion-dollar sport that basically isn't monetized. He pointed out in that we don't have a professional league, that actually rowing is not a sport that's flush with lots of cash, and lamenting the structural challenges that our sport has created for itself. And as a result, I got to know him, and we had a really interesting discussion about the sorts of things that we did in COVID. We all know that we changed the way we ran our clubs. We organized ourselves online. We used Zoom, all of these sorts of things. And both he and I think that's an opportunity for us to look at the future. Were there things we did last year that could be helpful for the future running and administration of your club? And so he and I are going to do a joint webinar on club management and virtual tools for club management. So this is an opportunity for anyone who's on a club board, who's on a committee, who's a coach in a club that wants to grow or change itself, get more members, maybe start a Learn to Row program, start a masters group. So please come and join us. The link is fastermastersrowing.com/register/club-management. Or if you go to our courses, our programs page on the website, you'll just find it in the menu, and it's right at the very bottom. So I'm really looking forward to that. The date is the 22nd of November, and the cost is $19 to attend. It will be recorded, so even if you can't attend live at that exact time, we will obviously look forward to welcoming you after the fact. Now, you're going to attend, aren't you, Marlene?
I am. I'm planning on it. I think it actually sounds really interesting. And since I have a very new club, I need all the help I can get, so I'm definitely looking, ways we can organize people, ways you can make things reduce friction, right? Make it easy for people to join, make it easy for people to join classes or sign out boats, or, every club is probably a little bit different in terms of how their milieu is and how they need to do things. But, just knowing what some of those tools and organizational platforms are out there that can make life much easier. Doing administration by hand takes a long time, and one doesn't and if you have a club that's, maybe your club is small now, but it might not be small in 5 years. So if you can set up, get people into a system, as you grow that system, it definitely makes things a lot easier.
Certainly does. Now we'll move on to this past week, which is the segment on the show where we talk about the things we're doing more broadly to advocate for Masters Rowing. So, big announcement, drum roll.
Ta-da.
We are speaking at the US Rowing Convention this year. So we're delighted that they've added a whole extra day to the convention called Masters Monday, which is the day before. Is that right? The start.
Yeah, it's the day before the main part of the conference. Yes, Monday, the 6th of December.
And we're going to be talking about an inclusive vision for the future of Masters Rowing. You've got the detail.
Yeah, sure. Let me read up. Well, this is the description of what we're going to be talking about. What do masters want? This session will focus on ways we can broaden the appeal of rowing for adults. Clubs need to adjust their offering for this fast-growing membership category. What does it mean to age well? Masters are not a homogeneous group. They differ by life stage and physical capability. Can we coach athletes post-surgery or during menopause, post-menopause? Coaching for masters requires new skills, pathways, new ways to introduce adults to sweep and sculling, new flexibility in crew lineups and training times. And not all masters want to race 1K. So we have some suggestions about new racing and event formats which will appeal to masters. And that's what we're going to be talking about.
Yeah, and we're both going to be doing it. So it's going to be a sort of, what do they call it? A double-hander.
It's going to be just like this. No.
It is actually. It is virtual, so we certainly won't be in the same room, that's for sure.
We've never been in the same room. Why should we start now? No, I'm kidding.
Oh, that's not weird.
No. But
anything else you've been up to this past week, Marlene?
Oh, honestly, I've just been scraping together some of my rowing friends, and we've been, weather is turning cold where I am, and we're every, there's no wind, let's go out. So we're still eking out the end of November. So that's basically what I've been doing. It's just, we're trying to get out a little bit more, and I've been watching race results a lot. I worked with a woman who won the silver skiff in the women's singles, so quite excited about that. So,
wow,
congratulations. Yeah, so that was exciting. It was exciting. Now things start to wrap up, at least in the US. I think there's maybe one or two, maybe one head race in California now, and then things start to quiet down and people start to shift into winter mode in North America. Even if they're still on the water, winter training mode, I would say.
That's right. Good stuff. Now, our big topic for this week is feet on the footboard. Now, getting your feet connected with your boat is a crucial part of how to move the boat forward. It's where you actually join on. It's the only place that actually can add leverage, that can add power and pressure to moving the boat, because obviously your seat, you're just sitting on it and it moves, whereas your foot stretchers are fixed. And let's start just by explaining the kinetic chain and what that actually means for your feet.
Well, for our feet, our feet has to be applied to the boat through your feet, through your pressure, pushing on the foot stretcher. So our goal, if you think about driving the legs, driving off the foot stretcher, is to move the oar handle. So you need to, when we talk about connection, we talk about the connection between the feet to the hips, to the low back, through the back to the arms, to the handle, because you want to be able to transfer force from the foot plate to the handle to move past the blade in the water. And you have to have very good connection with your footboard in order to propel the boat forward past the blade.
Whoops. Which is precisely right. You can, I hope you can hear me. Something's gone wrong with my screen, so I'm not able to put myself forward.
Well, you'll come back to us. So.
I'll come back to us, exactly. One of the things that is really challenging about the foot on the footboard is so many people worry about whether or not they should be pushing with their heels or with the ball of their feet. So let's just run through how the recovery works. As you come off the finish and you've taken your oars out of the water, you extend your arms, you rock your body forward, and you start to bend your knees. And your weight comes onto your feet somewhere around quarter slide-ish. You should be able to feel pressure under the balls of your feet. And as you roll forwards, your heels lift gradually, depending on your flexibility, but it takes you into the full compression catch position. At that point, your balls of your feet and your toes are connected with the footboard and your heels are lifted. After the oars go in the water and you start your drive phase, what happens then is that your heels will push down just at the point where you are flexible and able to make that happen, and then you're able to push with the full flat sole of your foot. My hand was my foot, and it is helpful to be able to use your heel as well as the ball of your foot. But I think, Marlene, some people feel quite confused about whether this happens naturally or whether you have to force yourself onto your heels and then feel your leg drive more through your heels than perhaps through the balls of your feet, through that mid-drive phase. Do you have a view on that?
Well, I think that Volker Nolte made a really good point when we did our rigging webinar, which he did a wonderful presentation for that rigging webinar for us. He said, if you're driving with enough pressure, you don't have to worry about it. It's going to happen naturally. If you drive from driving off the balls of your feet to when your foot goes fully down on the foot stretcher to maintaining that pressure through the whole foot or the heels as you get towards the end of the drive, he made a very strong point that if you're keeping that pressure strong all the way through the drive, you don't really have to be like that conscious of it, because it's going to happen because you're applying enough pressure. But I think what we see when we're coaching people is that not everybody is necessarily strong enough initially to apply that much pressure, right? And some people may not understand, like if you push more with your quads and you never transfer to your glutes, because that's what happens, when you're initially pushing off the balls of your feet, it's a little bit more quads. As you get your whole foot down into the heel and that whole foot pressure, it transfers some of the power into the glutes. So if you've got somebody who's a quad pusher, they never make that transfer into their glutes, and they tend to push through their toes all the way through. So in that case, you might have to teach them drills. Some people may not be set up correctly in their boat, which they can't get a good purchase on the foot stretcher. So rigging certainly becomes an issue here relative to flexibility and how your foot stretcher angle is set up, because if it's not correct, some people simply they can't get their heels down, or or the track is bumping them, so there could be a physical obstacle to it. But I think if somebody is learning and they're not aware of this, I know that some of the types of exercises that I like to do might be from focusing on the last third of the drive and making sure that you're keep the heels engaged, so that, because that's a trigger for activating the glutes and maintaining the glutes. That heel pressure helps the glute pressure and that connection through your lower back. So you definitely want it, but you know, I think it's teaching that is part of also teaching somebody a stronger leg drive.
Yeah. And of course, a stronger leg drive means recruiting more muscles into making that movement, which is why, of course, those nice big glute muscles are really essential. Now, when it comes to pressure on the feet at the end of the drive phase, a lot of people lift their heels right at the end of the drive phase. In fact, some people say point your toe, which I think is a misleading thing to say, because are you pointing your toe upwards or downwards? But anyway, that's neither here nor there. And they feel then that they can hold on to the drive pressure slightly longer. Now, I don't know if this is a lightweight thing, but I definitely was taught it by someone who was obviously not quite as tall as me, and she was a lightweight. And I personally don't particularly feel the need to then lift my heels again at the end of the drive phase. Do you know what you do when you row?
Oh, I keep my, I definitely keep my heels down at the end of the drive. Absolutely. Because there might be some biomechanical information here that would help us in terms of comparing these two things. I don't have that at hand, but I would say in the boat, what I'm focusing on, say from mid drive, when you're if you're sculling, you're at the crossover, or if you're rowing sweep when the oar is at the perpendicular, I'm focusing on trying to maintain my full weight as much as possible between the foot stretcher and the handle. And in order to do that, you've got to work on the suspension and essentially stay up. So I mean, that's how I feel that I can do it, to prevent too much weight from coming, you know, from trying to keep that load equal between the feet and the handle. And I've always felt that I can engage the glutes better, but I always looked at it like, well, you know what, our feet are angled like this and our seat deck is angled up, and doesn't everything want to drive us up to keep the bow up? You know, I mean, so there is that element, you know, there is an upward feeling to the draw based on the angle of the oar handle. And, you know, that angle, you know, I mean, I always sort of thought, well, if we should be pushing off our toes at the end, why is the footboard angled the way it is? But I don't know. I just know that in my own rowing, it's stronger that way. But
I will say one thing: some people lift their heels at the end of the power phase because the deck of the boat hits their calves. And oftentimes, I think this is people who are rowing in shoes that are several sizes too large for them. So their heels have slid down, but because they're not that tall, the foot stretcher is quite close to the end of the slides. This is not a good way to row, full stop. The best solution is to find shoes that genuinely do fit you. And it should be possible in most boats to set the boat up so that your calves don't hit the deck. But there will almost certainly be situations where that is more challenging. One way around it is maybe to use a seat pad, so you lift yourself up just a couple of millimeters. That gives you just that little bit more clearance. But you might also be able to raise the shoes. If you can't change to a smaller pair of shoes that fit you, you can lift the shoes up so the heel cups are a little bit higher up the footboard, and that might enable you to keep that connection.
I think particularly for smaller rowers, I think in club I think that's a huge problem for people. I know it's something that, you know, you imagine a woman with a size 7 shoe and she has to put her foot into a size men's 12.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you can wear,
it happens all the time.
Yeah, you can wear a shoe within the shoe, but but yes, absolutely that. And they may, if they start rowing that way from the beginning,
Yeah.
they may never be able to hold that pressure on the footboard at the end of the drive from the beginning.
Yeah.
So then they don't know that they can do that. So, that is sometimes it becomes something that's, it's hard to correct that too. I think if somebody hasn't learned that in the beginning, because they ease off because they're going to hit the deck, they ease off the pressure at the end of the drive instead of maintaining that. So I think sometimes when someone then gets their own boat, which is their own size and everything, you have to, have done it on a few occasions, that you have to kind of reteach the drive, because now they're in a boat that fits them, and now they're able to use their leg drive and maintain the foot stretchers, but they've got a habit of not holding the pressure at the end of the drive. So that's something you have to look at sometimes when somebody gets their own boat, and it's part of setting that boat up. But you can have those interferences if you've learned to row in a situation where you're really not able to keep your pressure all the way through.
Yeah, absolutely true. Now, I did an interview this past week with one of the rowing shoe manufacturers. They're called Bont Rowing. And I had a couple of really interesting insights from the founder of the company. One of which was, do you grip with your toes during the rowing stroke? And he said, one way to find out is to take the insole out of your shoe and go and have a look at the indentations where your toes go, and do they look like they're really deep, or are your toes just basically sitting comfortably, in line with the main ball of your foot? Because he said you should not grip with your toes. It was a waste of energy, but also if you just imagine that you're kind of curling your toes a little bit to grip, it actually takes pressure off the ball of your foot, which is a much stronger part of the connection. Now, in the big wide world of shoe design, the ideal is to enable your foot to have the most direct connection possible with the foot stretcher. And this company came from having made shoes for cycling. And they went and did, through cycling shops, individual measurements of athletes' feet. Firstly, when their feet were flat and prone, and secondly, when the heel was raised up and they were putting pressure down on the ball of the foot, which is obviously part of the cycling movement on the foot pedal. What they found was really interesting, that your foot is pretty much, your toes are straight in line with the ball of your feet. And when you put pressure on, they splay out just a little bit. And then you take the pressure off and they go back to being straight. So there's this tiny little movement. And the insight that they got from this, which is what has led them to make the design that they have of their shoes, is that most shoes are designed with a toe that's symmetrical. And yet, if you look at your foot, even like your hand, most people actually have a big toe that's much longer than their second toe. And then the taper is quite significant down to your little toe. So your foot is asymmetric in profile. And so they have designed their shoes in that same profile. Whereas if you just look down now at whatever shoes you're wearing, I will hazard a guess that the toe is pretty symmetrical. It's not asymmetric. As a consequence of this, they can now enable your foot to do this tiny flexion inside the shoe during the rowing stroke. And I'm not doing a total sales pitch for this particular design, but that was a massive insight to me. And we actually went and did some work on, me and my doubles partner, looking at our own feet and just being conscious of what we actually do when we're in the boat, when we're rowing with our feet in the shoes, and we're rowing with our feet out of the shoes, and what's going on there. Now, for listeners who are subscribed to our newsletter, in the newsletter this coming week, we're going to have a discount coupon of 15% off their products, but you'll only get that if you subscribe to our newsletter, and they'll explain how to do it. So they have a very wide range. They have an entry level shoe that I think is about $99 US, and then it goes up to a top of the range. There are 3 particular designs. The main difference is that the technology is the same in each. They just use superior materials in the more expensive designs. So they have a carbon sole so that there's no cushioning inside the shoe. So when you put pressure on, it goes directly into the boat. And so the cheaper design is, I think, it's not a full carbon sole. I think it's a mix of things. And then the high level design has a fully waterproof fabric with a better breathability and the middle level design has, I think, 2 Velcro straps instead of 1, which is on the lower level. So I mean, it's pretty clear. But you can see how carefully they've thought about something that, personally, I will be completely honest, I've never gone into a great load of detail about how my feet in the shoes are working with the boat.
Now, if it's a carbon sole, does it allow your heels to raise up?
It's in 2 parts. There's a join in the middle which has a little concertina which flexes. So there's a solid toe bit, a solid heel bit, and the heel bit cups your heel quite tightly, and it has a big deep groove for your Achilles tendon to go in, so that there is you don't feel constrained, but it actually sits really kind of snug around the back of your heel. And this zigzag, you can see it on the underside, the zigzag concertina then is the flexion in the middle.
And do they stay in, will they fit, like, do they stay in the foot stretcher? They're not shoes that clip in and out and people walk around in them, are they? Do they stay in the boat?
You have both choices. You can have a regular pair of shoes that stays in the boat, or you can buy, it's called the Quick Release System, QRS, which I think is $20. And there it has that sort of star-shaped lock mechanism that fits into a countersunk area, which is mounted on your foot stretcher. So you can go either way.
I've never tried. I've never used the type of shoes. I guess I'm kind of old fashioned, or I haven't been racing in the last few years to think about it. But yeah, I haven't really used the shoes that have the cleat underneath, because I just wonder, like, are those, what if you have to walk around in the sand, and what if you have to walk around on the dock? Like, are they slippery, or, I mean, can you walk around in them, or when you get out of the boat?
But you look just as daft as a cyclist coming into a cafe. So it's walk on their heels,
Right. So it's just like walking. It's similar to cycling shoes in this sense that. But exactly. Well, interesting. I mean, it definitely, this directness, even just think again, like you said, just thinking about when all of our audience goes rowing tomorrow, or even on the indoor rowing machine, pay attention. Like, at the end of the drive, really, really typical thing, speaking of indoor rowers, because some people are going to be moving into indoor rowing, pressure on your feet. If you lay back too far, your feet are going to fall away from the foot stretcher. And you see this often when somebody is rowing on an indoor rower and they want a better score, so they lay back too far, which
they do.
We do not advocate. I advocate row the way you do in the boat, but when they're going for a longer score, the farther the handle moves, the longer your stroke length, the better your score. However, you're putting an awful lot of stress on your low back, and it's going to be very hard to lift out of that position to get your body over, which most people who do that do not get their body over. But also, if you watch your feet, you're going to see the toes come away, and you're basically holding yourself with that strap. And that's not the kind of pressure we want. Pressure on the bottom of your feet, not pressure on the top of your feet. So
exactly. So let's move on to talking about the sorts of drills and tests that people can run for themselves to work out whether or not they are successfully getting their weight onto the feet. So what's your number one drill, Marlene?
For feeling pressure on the foot stretcher, one drill that I like to use, which I started to mention briefly, was rowing, say 1/4 slide from the release. So this is at your backstops, 1/4 slide away, just basically just till the knees break. And that's about it. And I like to have people do a drill trying to stand up in their shoes. Now, you know, we've talked about a similar version of that in the past, but I like to use that drill. I like to use it at the end of the drive, because basically, as soon as somebody's handle moves through perpendicular, if you watch the sculler or rower at their hips, that's almost always where their weight falls down on the seat. That's almost always when the blade starts swinging to the stern of the pin. That's usually where inexperienced people start to lose their suspension. So I like to do that drill focusing on preparing for the release, keeping the weight on the foot stretchers, keeping the weight on the handle, and imagine that you're trying to stand up in your shoes. Like you can't really do it at that point, but it helps keep the pressure on the blade and the feet to stay light on your seat. Think about just trying to stay light on the seat. So that's one drill that I use.
So I like to teach people also to row feet out. So take your feet out of the shoes. Sometimes take your socks off as well, because then you can really feel through the soles of your feet. Put your heels in the heel cups and try and row. You will not have a normal finish because your feet will come away from the foot stretcher. But this is a really good way to row, particularly if you do it square blades, where you can actually feel your heels lift up to the catch, and then you can focus on pushing your heels back down as you come through the power phase, and being cognizant of the moment when your feet lose their connection. And that's really worthwhile knowing. Even though when you put your feet back in the shoes, you'll be able to hold on to the finish longer, when you lose connection with your feet on the foot stretcher, your boat is no longer going to be successfully accelerating forwards. It may still be moving forwards, but the fact is that with the blade in the water, the pile of water in front of the blade that you've built up and the hollow behind will be starting to equalize, because you're no longer pushing the blade through the water. And so the second drill that flows from that is to have your feet back in and be rowing normally, and to take your finish out when you feel the pressure come off your feet. And most people will find that that moment is much earlier than they are habitually taking the finish out. But just try it at a good pressure, doing it for 10 strokes and then go 10 strokes back to your normal way of rowing. So don't change how hard you're rowing or your rating or anything, and just timing your finish release point with the pressure on your feet, and see what that does to your speed numbers, your splits.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's very important, because if you're too long into the finish, if you lose that connection, like Rebecca says, well, it could be assisted drifting. That was one phrase she has that I like. And then I would say, even as another variation, as you get better at it, start to make that whole turn of the handle without losing that pressure at all. So first you have to understand where you lose pressure. Then you have to start to move that timing closer, and then start to see, well, can you just adjust that timing like a micro bit, and keep that connection as you're making the turn. And you have to kind of work on that incrementally. And we talked about at the beginning on the recovery, being aware of your feet on the foot stretcher. And I like to use as a drill on the recovery, particularly with newer rowers, say, first, second year rowers, is when you start to square, make sure already by that time you have good connection with the foot stretcher. And, if they need to coordinate things, I like to use that just as a coordinating point. One, to make sure that they're aware that their feet are feeling the foot stretcher, ready to drive, not starting the drive, but feeling ready to start the drive. And it helps me get them start to make sure that they're aware of the blade getting prepared. So along with your blade preparation, prepare your feet.
That's nice. That's really, really good. And it is one of the skills that as you become more experienced in rowing, it's these transitional points that really determine to a great extent how skillful you are and how well you manage to move the boat. And the transitions are easily the hardest part of the rowing stroke to teach and to learn.
Sure. And if you're approaching putting the blade in the water and then you go, oh, where are my feet? They're not in the foot shelter. Oh, I haven't squared my blade. Oh, my blade's not ready. You know, then all of a sudden you have 5 things to do when you should be doing one thing, and that is placing the blade in the water. So every, you know, learning that recovery timing at different stroke rates, you know, but I think that's one thing I like to connect together is like, okay, now you've your hands come away, you've got your body angle, you know, you've released the knees. Now let's start to make sure that the feet and the blade are prepared, and get them to try to synchronize that so that they can match that timing. And you know, obviously it takes practice to be ready to go in the water and to be off the water and all those things. But yeah, you don't want to have too much to do at that transition. There's too much going. Many things have to happen, but one at a time, in a very close, you know, in a small amount of time, but in sequence, you know. So
when I interviewed Caryn Davies, who is the stroke of the American women's 8 for many years, she said her biggest tip for aspiring athletes is to do all of your ergs with your feet out. So as long as the erg is under rate 26, she said over 26 you can't do it, but she said it helps to teach you to activate your core. It teaches you not to lay back too far, because you can't haul on the foot straps if the foot straps aren't over your feet.
Exactly.
So don't have loose foot straps over your foot. Actually step on top of the foot straps or undo them completely. And she said for her it was really the best thing that she thinks any young rower, she was talking particularly about juniors, but any aspiring rower can do to learn how to row effectively with their foot pressure right through to the finish, because you can't keep hauling on the handle because your feet come away from the foot stretcher and you'll just fall backwards, which you do that once and trust me, you won't do it again.
No, right. You learn very quickly. I have seen people fly out of the boat during that drill, but the indoor rower on the erg, that's a great way to work on this. It's another place to adjust your heel cup height and see if you have better contact with a certain heel cup height versus another one. And then you can measure that and try to mimic that in your boat. You can sort of suss it out on the erg. But yeah, I thought what Caryn said in that podcast also was, again, equal pressure. And I stole this from her. I use this in my coaching too, from your podcast, was, you know, you've got 3 points of pressure: equal pressure on the blade, equal pressure on the feet, equal pressure on the handle. And you've got to maintain that all the way through. You know, as the boat's accelerating, as you're accelerating, you've got to maintain that equal pressure on those 3 points all the way through. So, for example, when the blade is first in the water and our rower starts to drive, if you've got pressure on your feet and no pressure on the handle, guess what? You shoot your slide. If you've got pressure on the handle and no pressure on the feet, you lift too early. So making our students aware of that, gather the pressure equally, maintain the pressure equally, that also helps teach our proper sequencing.
Yeah, and that is the kinetic chain, which is what I started this discussion around. The kinetic chain is ensuring that there is a constant and complete connection from your feet, up your legs, through your glutes, up your back, down your arms, to your hands, from your hands down the blade to the tip of the blade that's under the water. And keeping that constant with no, if you imagine it's like a rope, when you take tension off a rope, it sags, doesn't it? So there's no saggy points in that. That is the art of training your body to being a successful rower, which is why we learned to strengthen our core, which is why we learned that you have to have strong hamstrings as well as strong glutes. All of these muscles balance each other out, and training them so that they can work closely together and effectively to keep those pressures equal, that's what enables us to put good power into the water and to move our boat. It's easy when you know how. Any last thoughts, Marlene, before we wrap up for the day?
Well, I ask our students to go out and experiment, try with your feet. Another drill, row with 1 foot out, 1 foot in, 1 foot out. What happens? Is it different from 1 foot to the other? Row feet out. These are really, really good drills, but, start really paying attention to how your feet feel and, how you're connecting with your shoes, and, power through the footboard.
Yeah. Enjoy. Tell us what you find. And don't forget to get onto our newsletter. It's fastermastersrowing.com/newsletter if you'd like to get a hold of the offer from our friends at Bont Rowing. So this has been Faster Masters Rowing Radio, the show dedicated to masters athletes who want fun, fitness, and confidence in their rowing. You can become a student of the sport by buying a Faster Masters Rowing program subscription today at fastermastersrowing.com/join. And we look forward to seeing all of you at the correct time next week, which will be 6 p.m. Eastern, except on the first week of the month when we do it earlier for our friends in the European and South African time zone. Till next time.